Team Trump is expected to be a no-show at the House Judiciary Committee's first public impeachment hearing on Wednesday. The president and his lawyers doubling down on complaints about the impeachment process as the flow of evidence from the investigation underscores and confirms what 2 weeks of public testimony laid bare: an attempted extortion campaign run from the top down by the president, his personal lawyer, and their deputies. And becoming even clearer today, it was carried out against the backdrop of potentially tragic consequences for a nation at war. Ukrainian President Zelensky speaking out today in a brand new interview saying this, quote, "I don't want us to look like beggars, but you have to understand, we're at war. If you're our strategic partner, then you can't go blocking anything for us. I think that's just about fairness. It's not about a quid pro quo. It just goes without saying." Trump, of course, seeking to twist Zelensky's words before they had a chance of knocking any sense into the kinds of Republicans who at other points in time were moved by the life and death struggles of Russia's adversaries with a tirade of lies that will spare you. Instead of engaging on any of the troubling facts about the Trump-directed Ukraine pressure campaign, Trump's lawyers choosing instead to launch their process attacks in a new letter that calls the impeachment process unfair and irretrievably broken. The House Intel Committee, meanwhile, working on a report of their own today, detailing the findings of their investigations as new revelations further clarify the picture of a president who withheld military aid until politically motivated investigations were announced publicly. Our friend A.B. Stoddard writing in The Bulwark that, quote, "Just hours after the hearings ended, a series of new developments started breaking in the press." Stoddard then lists a report about Russia's years-long effort to blame Ukraine for election meddling, new reporting about Mick Mulvaney's scramble to find legal justifications for Trump's actions after the fact, and news that 2 White House Budget Office officials had resigned in protest over Trump's delay of military aid for Ukraine. But as House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler put it in a statement today, quote, "If the president thinks the call was perfect and there's nothing to hide, then he would turn over the thousands of pages of documents requested by Congress, allow witnesses to testify instead of blocking testimony with baseless privilege claims, and provide any exculpatory information that refutes the overwhelming evidence of his abuse of power. The case against the president and his refusal to offer even a scrap of evidence to refute any of the facts is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. From the Washington Post, national political reporter Robert Costa. With us on set, senior writer for Politico, Jake Sherman. Former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards is back, plus former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice, Matt Miller, is here. Bob Costa, let me start with you. I thought A.B. Stoddard's piece put into sharp relief the actual dynamic. And I know we all swim in the political reality, but the actual dynamic is that 2 weeks of sworn testimony with a punishment for lying being perjury has only been confirmed by subsequent revelations reporting in your newspaper and other news organizations. Just talk about what is becoming sort of beyond debate, the facts of this case, what Trump did.
President Trump's allies on Capitol Hill are reluctant to engage in a substantive debate about the substance of the testimony because they feel that's not a comfortable position for them to be in ahead of a Senate trial, ahead of their own elections in 2020. Instead, in private conversations and in the documents they're continuing and starting to release this week, their counter report, they're arguing that the process isn't fair to President Trump and trying to just move on from the actual discussion about the president's conducting of foreign policy.
You know, Jake, it's you know, to Bob Costa's point, I mean, it's what you do when you have no facts. And what's so interesting is that it's sort of described as a fait accompli, how this is all going to end. Do you think there is any I hate to use the word smoking gun because it feels like we had 17 of them in human smoking guns in the form of the witnesses in the impeachment investigation. But do you think there's any sort of doubling or tripling or quadrupling of the fact pattern that people are still hearing, or has that all been tuned out?
I think it's been tuned out. I agree with Bob completely. he's right. I got a call from a Trump ally today on Capitol Hill who said the only bipartisan vote will be that Democrats abandon their party and vote with us against impeachment, which I think will be interesting to see in the House of Representatives, that there might be some Democrats who vote against impeachment. There is not going to be any smoking gun that's going to appreciably change the political dynamics. I don't think at this point it doesn't seem that there will be. Now, we're entering a new phase of this process where the Judiciary Committee is going to pick up. There's been some unease with the Judiciary Committee and how they've conducted themselves in the past. We'll see if that turns around.
Talk about that, because I picked up on that, too.
I think Nancy Pelosi has, and Ms. Edwards could talk about this maybe better than I can, but she trusted Adam Schiff much more than she trusted Jerry Nadler. That's kind of the end of the story.
Let's be super duper duper blunt, because we
I thought that was pretty blunt.
Well, I mean, this has already taken a turn to the political dynamics. And I mean, the blunt assessment I heard from a source close to the House Intel Committee is that if you think that it was an accomplishment for public opinion to rise to 50% of the public who supports Donald Trump's impeachment and removal, the terror now is watch it deflate as Nadler takes over.
That's right, but we're not talking about a huge swing in public opinion. We're talking about a few points.
10 points higher than Mueller.
Yeah, you're right. It is 10 points, but I don't think it's going to go back down to this point. At least Democrats I talk to don't think so. They believe they're within a 2 or 3 point window where they have the berth to do this. They have public opinion on their side. That's why they want to move quickly. I think I laid out a case in Playbook this morning that moving quickly is perhaps not the best idea for House Democrats, but they are moving quickly. They want to do this by the end of the year. And we'll see what happens in Judiciary. Jerry Nadler has his work cut out for him, the biggest moment of his career in managing this process, which Adam Schiff, whether you like him or not, had a really tight grip on the process, which was really useful for Democrats, frustrated Republicans, even Republicans who considered Adam Schiff to be a decently honest player on the Intelligence Committee in the past, came away from this process not happy with how he conducted himself and how tight of a grip he had on the committee.
So the political reality may feel uphill for Democrats, but I'm just blown away. And A.B. Stoddard's piece for me today, sort of just, I talked about the testimony and the witnesses as laying brick after brick after brick of the same exact story. And these were, right-wing nuts. And I say that lovingly, having once swum around with a lot of right-wing nuts, to lifelong diplomats who probably don't have, really despise the idea of being associated with either party, told the same exact story. Since that investigation, Democrats are now armed with new reporting. One, that Trump knew about the whistleblower complaint before he ever started throwing around the word no quid pro quo. Two, that 2 OMB officials resigned. I mean, the facts keep telling the same story over and over again.
Yeah, the irony of the situation is the reason Democrats have tried to move so quickly is they're trying to bend over backwards to be fair to the president. They, I think, were receptive to the argument that you don't want to drag impeachment too far into an election year because it ought to wrap up before we get into the heart of election season. Ironically, if they wanted to really weaken the president, if they make the calculation that, look, Republicans aren't going to move no matter what. Republicans just have their minds closed. They're being completely partisan. They're not going to look at any of the evidence. So let's just try to weaken the president to the greatest extent possible. They would keep this impeachment inquiry going for months. Their powers are at the maximum with the courts. The courts are more willing to consider their subpoenas on a timely fashion, more willing to enforce them. They can keep public opinion focused on the president's misconduct versus all the things he wants the press and the public to chase from time to time. But they've tried to be fair. They've tried to move quickly to accommodate the president and to accommodate the country's need, or what they perceive to be the country's need, to get this over with before the election. Now, the president, of course, he turns around and uses that against them and says that they're rushing to do this. And Republicans say they're rushing to complete this quickly rather than to take their time. It's ironic. And I think what it shows is there is no good faith answer on the other side. They're going to criticize the process if it goes fast. They're going to criticize the process if it goes slow. They're going to criticize the process if you don't let the president's lawyer participate. They're going to criticize it if you let the president's lawyer participate. So I think the Democrats just have to lay their best case forward and let the chips fall where they may, and let the kind of political fallout be what it is.
Donna, I think that the fact that all the pressure's on the Democrats to keep doing what they've already done, which is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump held military aid out for a country at war, as that very powerful interview with Zelensky makes clear, in exchange for and in anticipation and waiting for a public commitment of the investigations. What else can they do?
Well, here's what they can't do. And what they can't do is allow the next phase of the process to get out of control. And I think that you're talking about a Judiciary Committee, Republicans and Democrats. It's hyper-partisan, that has, spans the spectrum of the Democratic and the Republican parties. And I think that there is a danger that Democrats in this phase of the process actually could overstep their boundaries. There still is a lot of pressure to bring in the Mueller findings into the articles of impeachment. I think personally that would be a big mistake. I think the Ukraine story is understandable. Democrats just need to drill it down to the basic facts, present them to the American people. I don't know that that's going to move Republicans. I don't know that it's going to move, certainly on that committee and in the Congress, but it actually could move that sliver of the public that isn't quite as tuned in yet. And we have to keep in mind that even though there was high viewership of the hearings that took place, it wasn't as high as it could be. And there were still people who didn't tune in to all of it during that time. And so there are still people who can be moved. But if Democrats overstep their bounds, then they're going to be in deep trouble. And I think judging from the Mueller hearing before, we saw that happen, and I don't think it went well for Democrats.
I mean, I know they listened to you, so I mean, just to be super blunt, is your bottom line, do what Adam Schiff did, don't do what you did with the Mueller hearings? I mean, is that your advice to them?
Well, I think so, and I think that one of the things they'd be right to do is actually have professional questioning. I think that would incredibly well for the Intelligence Committee, and given the makeup of the Judiciary Committee, I think could serve the Judiciary Committee really well. I'm being really diplomatic.
You're being really diplomatic. I love it. I know. I've got holiday brain. I forgot all my diplomatic niceties, not that I had many. Bob Costa, take me inside what could possibly explain Trump's interpretation of the Zelensky interview. He says in this interview, basically, he says, I don't trust anyone at all. Ukrainian President Zelensky speaks out on Trump, Putin, and a divided Europe. I don't trust anyone. And then he talks about basically the kinds of messages that we heard from Ambassador Bill Taylor that, just in the last few days, Ukrainians have died. Ukrainian soldiers have died at the hands of Russians. I think 13,000 Ukrainians have died in this conflict. I mean, is there anything that sobers this up, or is the whole thing sort of lost to the politics of it?
You see not only President Trump, but other Republicans continuing to talk about the Biden family, Hunter Biden, Burisma, and not talking about the ongoing hot war in Ukraine with Russia, about the issues about Crimea. And that is the real dividing line in this impeachment process. It's that many Democrats and some Republicans, but most Democrats, see a Ukrainian president, a 41-year-old Volodymyr Zelensky, struggling to get military aid, securing it from the United States Congress that appropriates it, yet finding it delayed month after month, and hearing this president talk about corruption and issues there amid this delay in aid, and seeing a real abuse of power in that sort of conduct from President Trump. But Republicans keep trying to say President Trump's intent was simply to look at corruption, and the intent, if that was the intent, it's excusable. And so far, because we live in such a partisan era, you see both camps essentially staying in their respective spots.
So let me ask you about a man who may one day be described even by Trump as his favorite mistake. Rudy Giuliani's pals today. We learned there may be more federal charges, more accusations against Rudy Giuliani's two businessmen. I believe it's fair to call them Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump's men on the ground in Ukraine. They were involved in smearing Marie Yovanovitch, the recalled U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And NBC News is reporting that federal prosecutors say they expect to file additional charges in their case against Giuliani's associates, Lev Parnas, Igor Freeman, and a couple more names challenging for me to pronounce. But Bob Costa, what is sort of the state of Rudy Giuliani right now? What is the gravest concern? And are you picking up that he's been given any reassurances that this won't go very far from the very Trump-friendly Justice Department?
Oh, there are many lingering questions about Mr. Giuliani and how he dealt with these associates, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. And the real questions that are remaining are about President Trump's involvement in private conversations with Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman, have both mentioned having exchanges with President Trump through their lawyers. Learning more about those exchanges will give us a better picture of what President Trump explicitly did or not in terms of directing some kind of outside of the chain of command foreign policy operation.
You know, Matt, Bob's colleague, Bob Woodward, says the truth emerges, and it emerges from weird places. But as Bob Costa is saying, it could emerge from sort of working their way up. And there aren't that many people between Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. I mean, there's nobody between them and Rudy Giuliani. And then according to Rudy Giuliani, in all of his press interviews, there was nobody between Rudy Giuliani. He was there on behalf of the president. This seems like a very ominous sign for Rudy and potentially the president.
I think so. Look, the truth emerges. It especially emerges when the people who are trying to get to the truth have leverage. It was, I think, incredibly impressive how much of this scheme Adam Schiff was able to uncover, given what they had to work with. Look, in 2 months, they were able to break the stone wall, get witnesses, hold public hearings, and really revealed to the American public the entire scheme.
It helped that Trump and Mick Mulvaney confessed to it.
It did, but they didn't have a lot. I mean, they don't have, they can't threaten people with federal charges. What the Southern District of New York can do, obviously, is threaten people with charges. Parnas and Fruman are under indictment now. Rudy Giuliani is under investigation. The prosecutor said in court today it's likely there will be superseding indictments. Those could be additional charges against these two of Giuliani's associates who have already been charged. It could be charges against Rudy himself. And so I think when you look at the parallel tracks that these investigations have been going on, the kind of political investigation in the House that could result in impeachment, and the criminal investigation in the Justice Department, as the criminal investigation keeps working its way forward and kind of moving up the chain in the same way we've seen criminal investigations move forever and ever and ever, when it gets to Rudy Giuliani, eventually you're left with this same question. He's left with this same question that people always are left with in that situation. Am I going to cooperate and help myself out, or am I going to try to take one for President Trump? And maybe he'll make the gamble that other people have made, which is I'll hold out for a pardon. Well, Paul Manafort is in jail waiting for his pardon. Roger Stone is going to go to jail waiting for his pardon. It is a dangerous
Michael Cohen's in jail.
Yeah, all of them. Right.
They're all in jail. It's an unbelievable picture. Do you think that there's interest in these committees to speaking to these people, or is there a real willingness to sort of let the Southern District run its course?
There's definitely an interest. A few thoughts. Number one, we were talking about this before the show, but if they're already involved with the Justice Department, there's probably little chance that they're going to feel the need to talk to congressional investigators. And there's not much overlap. It's not that the Justice Department's not going to say, oh, well, we'll let you off the hook.
It's been reported, though, that Parnas' lawyer has offered him up.
He has offered. That's an offer from one side. I'm not sure that that's a reciprocal agreement. I don't think we know that at this point. And number two, again, the speed with which Democrats want to proceed precludes them talking to this universe of witnesses. So there's not much time. And think about what needs to happen in the next 3 weeks to get this done before the end of the year. Adam Schiff needs to go in front of the Judiciary Committee. Republicans need to respond. They need to do articles of impeachment. That took 3 days alone in 1998.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff to get done, and in a short period of time, the Democrats really want to get this done in.
Bob Costa, I'm going to give you the last word before we lose you. Do you understand that there was any debate inside the White House about how to respond or whether or not to send someone to the Judiciary Committee hearings, or was that a pretty cut and dry decision made by the White House counsel?
There has been internal debate about whether to send someone from the White House. But ultimately, it was decided that the Republicans and President Trump want to argue that this is a process that's illegitimate in their eyes, and that's the case they want to make. So by not participating, they're making that case. But they are putting some pressure on Congressman Collins and others on the Judiciary Committee to make sure that they're going to speak up and have a pretty forceful case on President Trump's behalf in the coming days. But as ever, President Trump wants to mount an outside operation from the White House, and media-driven, tweet-driven at this point.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.